This is Guy Burgess. I want to talk about ongoing efforts to save democratic institutions and the implicit challenge that poses to the conflict and peace-building field. I'm going to be approaching the problem from the perspective of the United States, which pretty clearly has some very, very serious problems with its democratic institutions. But the problem is much broader than that this really is a humanity-wide problem, and we very much look forward to getting reactions and additional information from people who are working on the democracy problem from other perspectives in other countries and other cultures. As a good starting point, President Biden has campaigned for office as a president for all Americans, and he's issued on numerous occasions various calls for national unity. And this is in stark contrast with his predecessor, President Trump, who I think it's fair to say based his whole presidency on a kind of us versus them politics. Now, President Biden comes into office having won a convincing victory, and even a pretty strong victory for a country like the United States that typically has lots of close elections. But it was a long ways from the kind of decisive victory that would have changed the course of politics. The blue wave that was supposed to bring Democrats into offices at all levels failed to materialize. And the truth is only about 90,000 votes, if you'd switch them in just the right places, could have dramatically changed the outcome of the election, giving Republicans full control of the government rather than Democrats. In other words, this was an election that was very, very different from the post-Watergate elections, which really did send the country down a whole new track for quite a while. This statistic, I think, gives you a sense of still how deeply divided we are as a country. In the first opinion poll that asked folks to rate President Biden's job as president, he found that 98% of Democrats thought he was doing a good or excellent job, but only 11% of Republicans. That's a gap of 87%. And by comparison, when Trump came into office, the gap was 76%. And when George W. Bush came into office after that very, very close election that was decided against Al Gore by the U.S. Supreme Court, the gap was only 56%. So the truth is we're even more divided than we've been before. And on the one hand, President Biden is pushing hard for a kind of national unity platform and a set of policies. He's also getting pulled pretty hard by the partisan left for a set of progressive policies. And it's not quite clear what the final mix is going to be. So the bottom line is that President Biden's call for national unity is what you might call an easier said than done kind of problem. The truth is that over the long term, the United States is becoming increasingly polarized. These statistics from the Pew Research Center trace this all the way back to 1994, and it's been getting worse ever since. So this isn't just about Trump. It's something deeper that's wrong with our politics. And one way to think about this is the notion that both sides in the election that we just had, and increasingly so over elections over those past few election cycles, folks on both sides have felt that they absolutely, positively couldn't afford to lose. And we had a whole series of essays on Beyond Intractability that explored this last fall, and I think did a fair job of predicting some of the problems that we've been having. But the other part of this is that both sides recognize that they could easily have lost the election. So when you have democratic institutions in which elections come up and you could easily lose and that loss would have been unacceptable, people start to ask questions about whether democracy makes sense. And this is reflected in country after country with declining support for democratic institutions, especially among the young who, the truth is, have had less experience with a democracy that works. And so we're at a bit of a dividing point where we could continue down the path of democratic institutions that try to build what folks in the conflict field sometimes call the power with society, as opposed to a power over society where some group or some strong man has power over everybody else. This is called autocracy. And that can get pretty attractive if you think the strong man's going to be on our side. Now, the truth is, while autocracy might have a bit of an increasing allure, in practice, what you're likely to get is competition from two sides or more than two sides that want control, and you're going to get a lot of conflict, potential civil unrest and war. You're likely to be left with the kind of stalemate that the United States now has, in which people are pretty much powerless, and we have what's called an autocracy, another word for anarchy, in which we can't solve any problem at all. So what the challenge is, and since we're talking about conflict here, I think this is a conflict and peace-building challenge, is to somehow find a way to bend the arc of history back toward peace and democracy. And I think the key to doing this is we need to figure out how elections can be the sort of thing that people can afford to lose. If you don't have faith that democracy will provide you with a livable future after an election, your support for democracy is likely to be pretty weak. So one of the strengths of the U.S. democratic system is that it does have these fundamental rights that are built into the Bill of Rights. They've been amended over the years to include a wide range of civil rights and women's rights, and a whole set of individual freedoms where people can have confidence that no matter how the election comes out, they have a core set of rights and freedoms that are going to be there. And that's a big key to building the kind of support that you need. Now, the other thing that I think you need is a common positive image of the future where you look forward and say, I can see how I'm going to personally get to a better place. Now, this is something that we had in the United States after World War II, where our parents, the so-called greatest generation, I'm a baby boomer, suffered through the Great Depression and World War II. And after that, they just wanted to settle down, get together, work together, and build a better future. They built towns like Levittown, Pennsylvania, where you can talk about whether or not you like that kind of tract housing, but there was a hopeful future. We built interstate highway systems. We built all sorts of things. It was a time when the government enjoyed enormous trust from the American people. And that's changed. Now what we're doing is, in a sense, we're barreling down some highway and we don't know where we're going, but there are lots of things that could go wrong. We have a pandemic that's starting to look like maybe it's better if the vaccines can get out, but there are new variants and the vaccines have problems. And it's not clear how the economy is going to come back after the pandemic. We seem to hate each other more and more. The disintegration of the society is widespread. Lots of people are now really starting to suffer through the consequences of climate change. As I'm speaking, the state of Texas is suffering from the failure of its electrical and energy grid in a huge cold wave. We suffered through enormous fires last fall. Others have suffered through hurricanes. The climate is changing in ways that could wind up hurting a lot. We don't have faith in democratic institutions anymore. The risk of violence, as we saw with the attack on the U.S. Capitol, is getting to be very real. So what we need to do is to get this fog of fear and uncertainty and to figure out how we can transform that into a clear vision that everybody has so they can see where they're going. They're going to see how it produces a future in which they would want to live. And this is, I think, the challenge for the peace building and conflict field, and a challenge that we're going to address again and again in the series of short videos that we're putting together as part of this program.